Hi, I'm Laura Ellis, and I want to welcome you to today's edition of Happily Ever After. I'm so pleased and honored today to have a very special guest, my brother Kenyon. Hey, Kenyon, how you doing?
Hi, Laura. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. And my brother is going to talk to us today about conflict resolution. Is that
That's
it?
right. That's right.
Kenyon and Anya, his wife, have already celebrated how many years, Kenyon?
6 years going on 7. Time flies.
I cannot believe it. So even though he's my little bro, he's in the know when it comes to solving resolutions, something that David and I are learning to do as well as newlyweds. So I'm always open for knowledge. And even though he's my younger brother, he's pretty smart. So Kenyon, can you share with us about conflict resolution?
Sure, I'd be glad to. And I know that people have different ways and different styles and different personalities in terms of how they end up resolving conflict. But, like anything else in life, I think you have to plan. And I think this starts actually before you get married in the dating stage. And one of the things that I was intent on doing was kind of setting some ground rules or a game plan to how to resolve conflict before you're in conflict. Because trying to set up parameters or boundaries for conflict in the midst of a conflict is not going to work. So I think that whoever you're with, you should have a conversation about what is acceptable. What are the rules of combat in your marriage, in your relationship? And then you two should honor that when there is a conflict. But failing to plan for it, I think, could potentially lead to disaster. So, for example, what I told my spouse when we were dating was like, look, we're both very educated people. We love each other. I was like, we should be able to speak intelligently with one another without the use of curse words, swear words. And so we committed not to swear at each other or to use curse words in our conversation generally, but then also in the heat of conflict, when one is prone to have those words bubble up in your consciousness. But we decided beforehand that we will not say hurtful, disrespectful words when a conflict arises. The other thing we agreed to do is that there is no manipulation, and that is transparency in our motives in dealing with each other. With your spouse, you're naked physically, obviously, but that nakedness should also extend to emotionally and your motives for wanting to do things. And you should not lay traps for your spouse or try to manipulate them to what your position is and what you want to do. Deal openly and fairly. And you all just have to agree to resolve that. Another thing we try to do, but not always successfully, is try not to let the sun go down on our anger. And that's kind of a biblical principle that we try to honor, but it doesn't always work that way. But I would say it's better to let the sun go down on your anger if you're going to say something in anger that you will regret later. So I would rather address my spouse with sober mind when I'm not red with anger and the like, than say something that I would regret and want to take back later that I don't really mean. And so those are kind of the ground rules that we set. And it's challenging to uphold them at some times or some points in time. But overall, it makes for a very loving and caring relationship, which is why you're in a relationship and why you got married to that person. Not to control them, not to manipulate them, not to be disrespectful, but to love on that person. And I think by setting some ground rules, a game plan, if you will, for the guys ahead of time, that helps you kind of decode and deflate tense situations when you're actually in the height of a conflict.
Wow, Kenyon, that's really great. Could we kind of repackage some of that, meaning that when you say you don't use certain words when you're in a conflict, what do you mean by that? You specifically said curse words. Why are those words in particular so difficult? And what makes, can you unpackage that a little bit for us?
Yeah, so, generally speaking, for most of us, curse words are used in a way that is intentionally meant to cause harm, to cause injury, to show disrespect and point of emphasis. But I would say that since we are talking about your spouse or your significant other, you just need to be careful and not use words that can injure or hurt someone. You don't want to hurt someone that you love. Now, obviously, if you're in a relationship, you're in that person's life every day, you're going to step on each other's toes. You're going to get angry about things. You're going to disagree about things from time to time. That's just life. But I think if you are intentional beforehand, before there's a conflict, to agree not to say injurious things to each other, then I think you have a stronger relationship. And that doesn't mean that you don't have disagreement. That just means that even in the height of disagreement, you can still show love and respect for that other person. And I should say it extends beyond curse words too, and that gets the manipulation. Don't, bring up something that is a point of vulnerability for your spouse that they shared with you because of the intimacy of relationship, and use that against them in an argument. It's just not fair. You have access to that information because you're in a position of trust with that person. Don't turn that around and use that as a fiery dart with someone. That's disrespectful. So just be thoughtful about that and agree to that beforehand before you have a conflict.
So using the word choice is very important. Transparency is very important. You use the word nakedness, but you equated that with transparency. Being a person of authenticity, not using the information. It's like insider trading. It's actually
That's right. That's right.
It's like insider,
except not for your benefit. It's to cause harm.
Right, and it's still unethical as well. And then you shared with me some other tips when you were talking about a relationship is a two-way street, but it's not always 50-50. Can you share a little bit more about that?
You're right. You have so many or a certain number of people that say, well, I need a relationship that is 50-50. Well, relationships are not 50-50. You know why? Because life happens. And you might have a spouse whose parent dies, or you might have someone that struggles with depression. You might have someone that becomes sick or ill for a period of time or for an extended period of time. And that person may not be either emotionally available because they're grieving or because they're going through something. And they might not have the energy and strength if they're working overtime on, at work, where they can't wash the dishes like they normally would wash dishes. So what I'm saying is it's fluid. It's not always 50-50. Sometimes it might be 70-30. Sometimes it might be 80-20. Sometimes it might be 60-40. There's an ebb and flow in responsibilities. I mean, sure, you have general understanding about the roles that you all play and your responsibilities in the relationship and around the house, but that's a fluid concept, or at least it should be. And I think if you have the absolute expectation of 50-50, you set yourself up for failure and disagreement. So that boundary about who gives what, that's going to shift. That's life. You have to respond to circumstances.
Okay, so I'm hearing, as a person in a marriage situation, word choice, transparency, vulnerability, trust, boundaries are even important. And it's also important to have realistic expectations due to circumstances. So this is a lot. That means that when a person gets married or two people get married, they have to have some, in my opinion, based on everything you shared, a certain amount of maturity and a certain amount of selflessness. I don't think going into a marriage, a person should be selfish, because it seems like that's doomed for failure because things may not work out as they think.
Absolutely. And I'll give a simple example. I owned a house when we got married, and I had all my things in the kitchen organized and certain cabinets and certain things. And we had been married for a few months, and I reached into the cabinet to get something I expected, but it wasn't there. I said, where in the world is, such and so? And I said, honey, I said, have you seen, whatever? She said, oh yeah, I moved it over there in its natural place, and I moved that from there over to its natural place. And I just said, okay. But you know what? I got married kind of late, 45 years old, and I had some trepidation about the fact that I might be a little bit rigid in my ways and not flexible. But the truth is, if you're in a loving relationship, you can be flexible. It doesn't always have to be your way. Arguments are not to be won and lost in a marriage. It's a partnership. So you need to resolve things amicably where you come together on agreement. So, we don't really keep score about who wins arguments. I don't feel the need to win arguments. That's not the point in marriage, because we're walking that path together.
Wow.
And so we just need to figure out a joint path of understanding. And sometimes that involves yielding, and sometimes that involves the other person yielding. It doesn't have to be all one person's way.
Exactly. And as a school employee or an educator, I think that's also a lot of things that you said can be employed or put into action or implemented in many phases of life. I love the fact that you started this with, I had a game plan or I have an intention. And I know we in the school system, we have plans like fire drills and all kind of things that we have to practice. So if something happens, we're not, as you said, trying to figure it out, because by the time we figure it out, it may be too late. So it's important in our relationships, even, I think marriage is one of the most intimate relationships, but even in our relationships at work, in our relationships that are social, that we communicate in a way that's positive to strengthen and build each other up. So how much more important it is in a marriage.
That's right. Let me break it down for the guys. So, sports analogy, if you play basketball or you play football, your coach has you run plays over and over again, repetition. That's the game plan. We go from this play to that play to this play. You don't just get out on the court and think that you're good enough to just play as a team and win against good competition. So you have to have a game plan set up before you step on that court to how you will handle certain situations. In football, we used to practice, okay, we'll practice for when we're on the 50-yard line. And this is the type of plays that we will run. When we're in the red zone, which is within the 20-yard line, these are the type of plays. We'll run these type of plays on the goal line to try to score. We'll bring in, the big player to push it on in. There's a game plan involved. Now, as much as you enjoy sports, how much more important is your wife in terms of being successful in your relationship? Have a game plan, show leadership, but be respectful in it about, hey, these are the parameters, these are the rules of engagement for how we resolve the conflict. And I promise you, your wife, while she might want to curse at you sometime, she will honor that, and you will have a good relationship, because things can escalate beyond what you anticipate if you don't honor each other. But I think if you do honor each other, your spouse will appreciate that, and even in conflict, you're showing love to one another.
That's great. Kenyon, thank you so much for your words of wisdom. I'm so happy that you're here. And I always try to end each episode putting God first. So very quickly, how has God played a key role in your marriage relationship?
Well, the cursing, the non-cursing, that's all biblically based, not wanting to curse, honoring your spouse, being a servant leader, not having to have things my way all the time just because I'm the man, yielding to my wife. One of the things she did that I didn't do that is actually beneficial. I have to take off my shoes every time I enter the house. And at first I was like, I have to take off my shoes every time I enter the house. But it actually makes sense because you don't track dirt and stuff all through the house, and it makes for a cleaner environment inside. But you have to yield to that. Another situation, my wife wanted to do some professional development course that cost a certain amount of money. And I was like, well, you want to spend what? I was like, okay, hon. So let's spend the money on that. But I ended up benefiting from it because she learned some general concepts that she then shared with me that I found useful. So supporting your spouse is a big deal. It's important. And we're to demonstrate servant leadership.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Kenyon, for being my special guest today for a happily ever after. And everyone, I'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Lori. Good to see you.
You too.